All right, thanks for tuning in to the OFN meeting room as we talk Kansas City Chiefs football, the defending Super Bowl champs. And that means we welcome in Arrowhead Tom, contributor for Arrowhead Addict at Fansided. Tom, good to talk to you again.
Yeah, great to be back. I know we talked before the draft, and excited to go back over what the Chiefs did, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about their chances of repeating when we have this upcoming football season.
Yeah, and repeating is never an easy thing to do. So the Chiefs went into the draft with not a lot of cap space and 5 draft picks. They ended up with 6 picks and nine rookie free agents that they signed that were in the Our Lads draft guide receiving draftable grades. And I've been doing a lot of these, I think that might be the most of any team. So without a surplus of draft picks, they sure seem to make up with the talent as far as the players they signed.
Yeah, I think they were ready to do their work on the undrafted side. They were ready to get those guys in. Obviously, they have limited cap space, but one of the things that I think I've seen since Andy Reid's taken over is they really they like to churn over the bottom part of the roster. And I mean, it's a Super Bowl championship team, and they're bringing back a lot of starters, but they've done a really good job of keeping guys, keeping guys who are kind of getting at the bottom of those rosters and just turning them out and giving people chances to develop. I think that's been a part of their long-term success, and hopefully that'll continue to be the strategy going forward.
Now, obviously, the Chiefs know what they're doing. Obviously, and you mentioned, of course, Andy Reid and Brett Veach, of course, has done a tremendous job as well. So these guys know what they're talking about, and that's why they won a Super Bowl. And I'm prefacing all of that because it's interesting grade-wise if you compare where our lads had these players drafted, slotted. The only player that the Chiefs drafted out of the 6 that went in the same round that our lads thought that they were going to go was the final pick in the 7th round. All the other picks went a little bit higher than our lads thought they were going to go. But as I said, the Chiefs know what they're doing. So let's talk about that, starting with a surprise by some. Not that they went with a running back, but that they went with a running back with their first pick. So they must, look, this kid is a really good player to have on your team, a championship college running back who was a big part of LSU's offense. He may not be the biggest guy, but boy, he's one of those running backs that just does not go down first, easy. Is the perfect type of running back for this offense. And I guess the type of player the Chiefs just couldn't let go by. So, yeah, maybe a little bit early, but he fits the team real well.
Yeah, I think when they made the pick, it reminded me of the 2007 draft after Peyton Manning won the Super Bowl with the Colts, and they drafted the Anthony Gonzalez out of Ohio State, and they talked about it at the time as it's kind of their way of saying, hey, thank you for thanks Peyton for winning the Super Bowl. Here's a new toy. Here's a new toy for Christmas, and that's kind of what it felt like when they took Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I was a little surprised that they went running back in the first, given I think everybody was expecting it to be something on the defense, probably cornerback, but I think they were probably, a lot of those people had kind of dropped off. Jeff Gladney went a couple picks beforehand. I really thought that was who they were going to zero in on. But in terms of the running backs that they met with, I really thought that they were interested in Clyde Edwards-Helaire. In the article I wrote before the draft, I mentioned him, but I had him going in the 2nd round. So I'm kind of in that same boat. Yeah. Where I thought, I really like the kid. I really like his skill set. I think everyone's, kind of agreed he's a perfect fit. But that, value-wise, he probably would have been better in the 2nd round. At the same time, you say those types of things, but somebody, the chances of him lasting to the end of that 2nd round were pretty slim. Sure. It sounds like, there were some other teams interested. There were some other teams just going, man, we really wanted to grab him. I think the biggest thing, the conversation I've kind of had with some other people who follow the Chiefs and cover the Chiefs is, do you think he's going to have more yards rushing or more yards, receiving his rookie year? I think his role in the passing game is going to be really interesting for Kansas City, and that's something that they've kind of lacked. They haven't. If you followed the team closely last year, they really didn't have a lot of confidence in their running backs. I mean, LaShawn McCoy, he got benched and sat for a while. Damian Williams was in the doghouse coming out of training camp. So it makes sense in some regards, and I think Andy's going to use use that player to the best of his ability, and he's going to maximize that efficiency. I think it'll be interesting. I went back and watched how they used Kareem Hunt in 2018, and I think Edwards-Helaire can do a lot of the same things. Probably not everything in terms of a physical profile, but he can offer a lot of the same similar skills and hopefully similar production on the field.
Yeah, I mean, because when we talked about the deep receiver class, even though the Chiefs didn't have a big need at wide receiver, we did say, wouldn't it be tough for Andy Reid to go through this class of receivers and not take one? Well, he didn't take one, but he took a receiver at running back.
Yeah.
So, and he definitely got the best one. And you can't fault him for that, because that's one of those picks, like you said, that maybe it wasn't necessarily in need, but that's okay, because what you don't want your GMs doing is drafting for need, taking a guy that could have been the 50th pick of the draft because, well, he's a need guy. Hey, if this kid was graded higher than where you needed, then, and you were just coming off a Super Bowl too, it's a good decision. And the kid's a good player, and as long as he stays away from getting injured, I would probably put money on him producing more in the receiving game than the running game myself.
Yeah, I think the other part, again, I go back to the game in Denver, back in October. They didn't have much. I don't think they have somebody that they trust to hand the ball off on, on a 3rd and 1, on a 3rd and 2, a real short situation like that. And if, Edwards-Helaire is the guy, and that means that they're not running that quarterback sneak with Patrick Mahomes, I think everybody will celebrate that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, now let's talk about Willie Gay, because I don't know what the rest of the scouting services what they thought of Willie Gay, because all we care about is our lads here. But our lads had Willie Gay as a 6th round grade. Gay goes in the 2nd round. Matter of fact, our lads had Willie Gay rated just a little bit higher than Mike Dano, who went in the 5th round. Athletic kid, but was suspended for nearly half the season this past year, which is also, in today's NFL, a little bit of a red flag. What did the Chiefs like, especially at that position? I don't know if he's going to play that position, because I didn't think, especially with the defense with the Chiefs play, is he going to be an edge rusher? Because that's something we talked about them needing, were edge rushers, not necessarily linebackers, even though I think they could improve their talent at linebacker, no question about it. But I just didn't think that position was a big need in their defense.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think that if you're not familiar with the Chiefs roster, you might have missed, but the elephant in the room is Patrick Mahomes is about to sign whatever massive contract that they're going to give him. He's going to get a blank check, and they're going to walk away with that. If you look at their contracts, some of the bigger ones on their books right now, Anthony Hitchens, they signed him a couple years ago, and his contract is, it's blossom. It's at that point where it's kind of blossoming, getting a little bit bigger, the total number, and then the guaranteed money is going down. So Willie Gay, I'm conflicted on, because I think it's, it was a pick they made entirely on potential. They need, they did have a need at linebacker. I really thought they would probably try to go, with more of a traditional middle linebacker. It sounds like what Steve Spagnuolo said the other day was that they expect him to play outside. Really hopefully be a guy that they like in coverage. They've talked about his skills and liking what he offers, and he did grab a couple of interceptions in college. So that one was probably the one that surprised me the most. Just to again, it's a roll of the dice. You talk about the character concerns, and Kansas City, unfortunately, last couple of years they've dealt with more than what I'm sure they've liked to in the past 2 years in terms of off the field stuff with some of their players. And, But the more, the more you look into it, and I don't ever want to, dismiss something, but, he missed time because there was an issue with a tutor, and, essentially the tutor was doing his homework for him. And there were some other players and other people, at the school who were involved with
Yep.
that. And then there was the report of, a fight between him and a teammate kind of later in the season than what you would. I mean, if you've been around the game of football, sometimes, those hot 2 days in the summer, guys are going to get into it here and there. But the report was that he punched a quarter. I think it was their backup quarterback at the time. Punched him before either a couple weeks before or the week of a bowl game. But the coaches, were very kind of didn't really make a comment on it, and didn't. I don't believe he was punished for that specific incident. So he's, in the interviews I've seen, he's taking accountability for it. He's taking responsibility. You don't know what that's going to do. These kids are interviewing for a job. They're trying to fulfill a dream. They'll say, they'll hopefully say the right things. But I think the athletic potential is up there. I had him, I had him closer to kind of a mid to late 4th round pick.
Sure.
That's not really factoring in the off field stuff. I thought one of the things that was interesting is Brett Veach said, if he had gone back, and had played another year, had a full season, he'd be a 1st round pick next year.
Wow.
And I thought that was a pretty bold statement. And, Brett Veach he said some stuff like that before, and so far he's been spot on. So I trust that.
Okay.
I think it'll be interesting. Hopefully they develop him well, but he's got a lot of work to do. Great athlete, but he's got I think he's got to, learn to process the game, and just needs to improve his instincts, and a lot of basics of the game that he has to grow in.
Is there a possibility at all, since the Chiefs are pretty up against it with the cap, that there might be any of the veterans could be in trouble this season before this season begins?
I don't think Anthony Hitchens' contract is really good to get out of this year.
Okay.
If I remember right, it's more of a cap penalty, a bigger cap hit for them. But next year, definitely, I think that there could be some transitions there. They did lose Reggie Ragland in the offseason, who was kind of playing. So the Chiefs have a handful of linebackers. Had Reggie Ragland, Damian Wilson, and then Anthony Hitchens. And Wilson and Ragland are both bigger guys, and probably, one's a Sam and one's a Will. And they're really both kind of made to play that Sam role. That's the and so Willie Gay, they think that they're going to kind of slide him into that, to that Will role, that weak side role.
Okay.
So that he can, he'll, again, more of a coverage guy, more of a quicker guy than Reggie Ragland. That's who they talk about him replacing. So that'll be interesting to see how that kind of plays out, because they're very different players. Ragland had a little bit of, they used him to blitz a little bit more, and he was, really stout against the run, but, that's kind of the opposite of what Willie Gay does. So I don't think anybody's job is in jeopardy this year, but definitely down the road, it'd be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I had the profile on the Chiefs in the Ourlads guide, so they were one of the 11 teams that I profiled, and I had linebacker as their 4th biggest need, but I said, and it was a short profile of the position. It speaks volumes that the Chiefs defense looked as good as they did with primary starters like Anthony Hitchens and Damian Wilson. Add in the loss of Ragland to free agency, and the Chiefs could use a player to eventually become the face of this unit. So I just see, I was in a conflicting thought there, because I was like, well, they did so much better on defense last year, and they got pretty much nothing that really from the linebacker position, that if you were going to look at one specific unit, that wasn't like the unit I'd look at that really put them over the edge on defense last year. So I figured, well, if that happened, then I guess maybe they could get by once again if they don't find the right player. But talent-wise, you did know that they needed a talent infusion, and they do need a guy to be the man. And if Beach thinks Willie Gay could have been a first round draft pick next year, then they believe, I guess, Willie Gay is the guy. He's going to be the man to lead that unit.
Yeah. So we'll see. To me, I think I would prefer they find another guy to run, to be in the middle of that defense.
Sure.
I think I'm more comfortable with Willie Gay being outside. I just think he's a guy that if you tell him to run to the sidelines and tackle someone, he'll do well at that. I'm not sure how well he's going to do between the, taking on guards and that kind of thing. So it'll be interesting to see, exactly how they play him and how he develops as a pro. Yep. But it was an interesting pick. That was probably I'm more excited about the athletic side of him now, but it was an interesting one.
All right. Now, I didn't really think of offensive line as a primary need as well, but you can never draft too many offensive linemen, no question about it. And they took the tackle out of TCU. What did you think about that selection?
Yeah, so if you would have asked me, I mean, well, you guys did, we talked about the different needs, and I really, close to the draft, I really thought, man, they really may be interested in an offensive line. I think, again, I go back to that moment in Denver. I think that changed some realities and some perceptions in terms of, what this team looks like with and without Patrick Mahomes. And so it's kind of a wake-up call. We talked about, look at some of the free agents that they signed after the draft. They added a lot of offensive linemen. We can talk about that here in a minute, but I thought Niang was a really interesting pick. They said that he is probably going to come in and compete at guard.
Okay.
And then
that makes sense.
Him to tackle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the tricky thing with Lucas Niang is he's dealing with a hip injury. That's typically a tough thing to come back from. Sounds like he was just, he was gritting through it this last year and played probably more than he should have on it. So it's hard to judge his tape too much. He has some really interesting tape from 2018 against Ohio State, where he did pretty well against, the younger Bosa and Chase Young. I believe he didn't give up a sack that game. So, hats off to him for that as far as the tackle goes. I think the plan for him is they're going to bring him in. They're making sure he gets healthy. They're going to give him a chance to play at guard. And then again, we talk about the cap situation. You have Eric Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz, who I think Mitchell Schwartz is one of the best tackles in the game. I think Eric Fisher I'd consider him like he's about as he's a good tackle. He's
solid.
I wouldn't want anybody worse for him. Yeah, again, I wouldn't want to go below Eric Fisher in terms of who I want for a starting tackle. But both of them have signed contract extensions and have contracts that are kind of growing. So I think if they're going to choose to retool that offensive line, they'd probably do it this way, where they bring in somebody and they can. You don't want to be in a position where you cut your left tackle and then you draft his replacement in the same year. At least my opinion, because then you don't know.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If that guy doesn't smart.
Out, you're putting your quarterback in jeopardy. So I think that's their plan for Niang, is get him healthy, see how he looks. If he can play tackle, great. Otherwise, I think you have a kid that you can hopefully develop to be a really good guard. It's going to be all about how he can move after that hip injury.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm excited about that one, just because I think the more time you give Patrick Mahomes in the pocket, the more fun it's going to be for everyone else.
And keep him healthy. Fourth round pick, L'Jarius Sneed, the safety out of Louisiana Tech, 4.39 speed, so that's huge. And he could play special teams. So what do and we did talk about the Chiefs needing to improve their defensive backfield. So now we thought that first pick would have been a defensive back. That was going to be the big position to go after early, but instead they used two of their last three picks on defensive backs. L'Jarius Sneed in round 4, and then the kid out of Tulane Keys, the corner, in round 7.
Yeah. I'll talk about both those for a minute. It'd be nice if they drafted guys with names that were a little easier to pronounce. But I think L'Jarius Sneed has become my favorite pick in this draft. So he played safety last year at Louisiana Tech, but he actually moved there from cornerback and So of course, the first thing you ask is, well, why did they move him? It sounded like they were very comfortable with all the cornerbacks that they had, and he was the one who was willing to move to safety. Um, the Chiefs and their zone defense, they really, I don't want to say there's not a distinction between safeties and corners, but they ask all of their defensive backs to do a variety of things.
Okay.
So um, you look at how Tyrann Mathieu is played. They drop him down, into the slot. They'll put him man on man on tight ends. They'll drop him into a deep zone. They move him all over. Last year when Juan Thornhill, sorry, I blanked on his name, went down with that injury, they actually moved Kendall Fuller, who had played cornerback for them, was a big piece in the Alex Smith trade. They moved him, and he pretty much started at free safety for the rest of the year and did really well. In fact, I think Washington might be moving him to safety full time, which is really interesting. So they kind of the two things I've seen so far from Steve Spagnuolo is, one, they're willing to develop young guys who have raw physical traits, and they move around their safeties and corners to kind of mask some of those, they may not be the best corners in the world, but they'll roll a safety over, or they'll move, they'll disguise their coverages in different ways to really help that. And so it's an interesting strategy. I don't, I'm not going to pretend to fully understand the X's and O's of it, but the way that they develop these guys, they really teach them to play different things. The thing about Snead is he's got a physical profile where I think he can turn and run with anyone. And when Steve Spagnuolo talked about him the other day, that's what he talked about. He said, we think he can play outside. We think he can play inside. We think we can play him at safety. So I think he's going to be a Swiss Army knife. I think most people have referred to him now as a cornerback, but he's going to be a defensive back. They're going to play him at safety. They're going to play him at corner. Okay. I think he'll see a lot of time in the slot starting out. But it wouldn't surprise me if he was starting by the end of the year, or he may end up getting thrown into the fire early with some of the stuff that Bashaud Breeland has going on legally. So we might see him sooner than later. But I'm pretty excited about him long term. I think he's got the potential to be a really useful piece back there. And then you mentioned the other corner, which is Thacarius, goes by Bo Pete Keys.
Okay. I'm not sure that's a good nickname, but we'll go with it.
Yeah. Interesting nickname. Kind of same deal. He's more of a true corner for Steve Spagnuolo. I think he's going to be a guy that they play exclusively on the outside. He reminds me a lot of who they have starting opposite of Breeland right now, and Charvarius Ward, just in terms of the physical profile and some of the way that they play. 7th round pick. They jumped back in to grab him because they thought that they wouldn't get him as a free agent. They thought that another team would pay him more. So I thought that was interesting that they were pretty urgent about picking him up. Obviously not a guy you want starting for you week 1 or 2, but again, if they can develop him like they've developed Charvarius Ward, I think that's pretty good. And that's who he reminds me of just watching his tape. And I'm not saying that just because both their names are
hard to pronounce.
Thacarius and Charvarius, that's not why they're getting that comparison.
Well, how about Javaris? Because Javaris Davis was actually graded higher than both of the DBs that the Chiefs drafted by our lads. 4th round grade. So they pick up Javaris Davis after the draft, and they also signed Lavert Hill. I'm a Michigan fan, and I didn't. They kept talking. Hill kept getting all these accolades, and I didn't see it. I knew he was going to be a late round guy. He's just too clutchy and grabby. But getting him off of basically all you had to do was sign him. You don't have to use a draft pick on him, and he played all those big games in college football. That's a good deal as well. But Javaris Davis was a 4th round grade, so it's not just the two guys they drafted. You got to also talk about Davis.
Yeah, I think Davis is going to make the roster. Again, a lot of that bottom of the roster, those last spots end up being guys who can play special teams. I think Davis is a guy who's going to, embrace that role. And again, kind of a smaller guy, but man, you talk about somebody who plays, plays a lot bigger than what he's listed at. And I was shocked when I realized that he was a undrafted free agent. I was really excited when they signed him. I thought, again, if they would have drafted him in the fourth or fifth or anywhere in there, I would have been pretty happy with that pick as a guy, to come in and play slot. The other thing about all these young defensive backs that I'll say, especially for Davis, who is a little undersized, you have a guy in Tyrann Mathieu who I consider, just watching him play, I think he's a very, very intelligent football player, and I think hopefully he'll he'll take these guys in under their wings and under his wings and mentor them and teach them, especially the guy, he's not the biggest player in the world, but he'll play up to it, and so that's going to be another interesting part of all three of these guys is seeing how they're mentored by the guys in the locker room who are already there. I think Matthew's going to play a big role for that.
Really, it's interesting because both Davis and Hill might end up getting as much time as the two guys that they got passed on as far as draft picks. But maybe that happens too. You got Davis and Hill are from Auburn and Michigan, and Snead and Keys were for Tulane and Louisiana Tech. So that's where the scouting comes in. It's not about where you go, and not necessarily big-time programs mean you're going to be better than the guys from the smaller programs. That's where scouting comes in, and we'll see how that pays off. But doesn't matter. You got all four guys, and that's good for competition, no question about it. Dana was picked in the 5th round, another Michigan kid, and Tershawn Wharton, a defensive tackle from Missouri S&T, was a rookie free agent that they signed. So those were a couple of other defensive linemen that the Chiefs added. Dana was a kid that transferred over to Michigan from Central Michigan. They expected a lot at Michigan from Dana in his final year. Maybe they expected some more production as a pass rusher. It didn't happen. But I just think that that's the way Don Brown, his defense, plays. He mixes and matches, and guys are in and out of the lineup all the time, so I don't hold that against him. But the Chiefs liked him to grab him in the 5th.
Yeah, I think for him, it's going to be a part of the puzzle, a part of their rotation on defensive line, and that's, again, I think one of the things that people are, you think that the Chiefs defensive line, you think Chris Jones, you think Frank Clark. But there were some guys on that line who really played big parts, and even as some of them went down with injuries, they replenished it. The Terrell Suggs signing at the end of the year. I mean, if you go back and watch a Titans game, he had a huge role in helping in that run game and that run defense. So they're the Chiefs and Steve Spagnuolo, for as long as I've known about him as an NFL coach, has utilized defensive linemen. Kind of that similar fashion, you're rotating in. You might be a defensive end one play, and then you're kicking inside to that defensive tackle spot, or you're bringing in you're taking a linebacker out and putting in an extra defensive end. He really loves to play with all those pieces, and so the more pieces he has up front, and that's what I saw out of Dana was he's a guy who's willing to do what's asked of him. Athletically, I think he's solid. He's not, I don't think he's going to jump out of the gym or, win in a foot race, but I think he's got enough contact balance and enough technique to, if you want to play him as your base end, as your weak side defensive end, you can get away with that. And then if you want to kick him in on a passing down, you might get a little more pass rush out of him than you would out of maybe, a 300-pound, defensive tackle.
That's the role I see him in. More of a situational pass rusher type early in his career, at least.
Yeah, and there was some speculation kind of early on that they might have him even try to play, so Steve Spagnuolo kind of, even same thing with his defensive line, some of his linebackers, especially his Sam spot, he loves to blitz that strong side linebacker. And so, when he was initially drafted, I thought, maybe they're going to ask him to stand up a little bit. And, I think he'll be a guy that you'll see him coming from different angles and different spots. And, whatever he's got in him, I think that they'll get out of him. Seems like a good kid, getting graduate transfer, did pretty well at Central Michigan. It's a step up when you're going from Central Michigan to Michigan in competition. So, I think he wasn't completely washed out, but obviously wasn't a superstar in a lot of ways, but he did all right, and so hopefully he'll fit in, and we'll see some
Okay, as
production from
far as
him.
some other players of note, rookies, Shea Patterson, another Michigan kid, the quarterback. And again, being a Michigan guy, I'm actually happy Patterson is gone. Steady player, did his
Mm-hmm.
job to get Michigan better, but not a difference maker at the position. Doesn't throw a good deep pass. I don't even know, to
Mm-hmm.
tell you the truth, if I'm not even sure the kid makes the team. I think he's a practice squad guy because I like Shermer. I think Shermer's got more potential down the road than Patterson. But hey, you didn't use a draft pick on him, and Andy Reid gets a hold of him. So you never know what you're going to get as far as
Mm-hmm.
that's concerned. He's got athletic ability too, so that might work perfectly into what Andy Reid is looking for. And they also added the kid Lipscomb, Elijah Lipscomb from Vanderbilt, as far as another skilled offensive player that
Mm-hmm.
they signed.
Yeah, so I mean, I saw the Shea Patterson signing. I was like, oh yeah, the Chiefs do need a quarterback. So, no, I think it's interesting. Again, that's a spot that they've kind of churned over this offseason. They're bringing back Chad Henne, who's probably going to be that backup for another year. But then they went out and they signed, almost as soon as the XFL folded, they went out and signed Jordan. I think it's Teamu, the guy who started for the Battlehawks, if I remember right. I think that's the team there. And that was an interesting one. Getting kind of a younger guy. Same thing with Shea Patterson. A little bit of athletic ability. Not the strongest arm in the world, but the thing that Andy Reid has done in the past that we haven't seen him do yet in Kansas City, which is take some of these guys, especially I think with Shea Patterson. He's a pretty. I know who he was, and I don't follow a lot of college football too deeply outside of the draft, and he's a pretty sought after recruit. I remember there being some hype about him a
Yeah,
couple
that
of years
was
ago.
there was
So,
a lot of
uh,
expectations at Michigan that he was going to be the difference maker. He was going to lead him over Ohio State and so forth. But he that's not his. He doesn't command that type of ability, but that's okay. But not everybody is a gunslinger. Not
mhm,
everybody has got that talent. That's why he wasn't drafted. But again, where he gets
mhm.
where you pick him up, that's how you have to evaluate this.
Yeah, and like I said, Andy Reid's a guy who might take Shea Patterson and make him look really good in preseason, and maybe he gets a start at the end of the year or something here or there. And maybe a year or two from now, Kansas City's trading Shea Patterson to I don't know the Cleveland Browns for a third round pick or
You
something
can
like that.
dream,
We've seen Andy
sure.
Reid do that with yeah, we've seen him do that with some
Sure, you
quarterbacks
never
before.
know.
So uh,
What about
I'm
Shermer?
crossing my fingers. That's so. I think they really like Shermer. He's a smart kid, um, but I physically I just think he's got too many limitations. He's really I think that's the biggest thing that holds him back. Um, I think they may have sent him back down to the practice squad. They may have actually cut him. Um, yeah, I mean he'll still hang around. He's Pat Shermer's son, and Andy and Pat are close, but I think
Do you think they keep three
I think they'll bring him
quarterbacks?
back to the practice squad. I think they'll keep three, and they'll probably try to keep a fourth on the practice
Okay.
squad. That's what they've
So it'll be
historically done.
those three
So
kids will battle it out for the two spots,
yeah,
and uh, you think Tamu and Patterson probably have the leg up on the third spot, the practice squad spot.
yeah. So it wouldn't surprise me. I think Shermer might be the guy who ends up on the practice squad, just because I think Tamu or Patterson might get some interest from
Okay.
another team here or there. And I think again with the practice squad stuff, you want a guy who's
Yeah,
very
and the
knowledgeable of the
offense.
game and can kind of
Yeah.
simulate situations. Yeah, so so I think again, Kyle Shermer is sounds like everything I've heard is
Hey, he's got
positive, and
Lipscomb there now.
um, you know,
That'll help him out
yeah,
of practice.
Yes. So yeah, I was gonna say that's the other one because the thing that going into the offseason, I thought the Chiefs they really need to get a little
Yeah,
bit faster on
exactly. That's
offense.
an issue. Yeah.
That's that was one I really was top of the board of priorities. And yeah, Lipscomb's again another one that I'm uh, little surprised that he wasn't drafted. Um, I think he's got an uphill battle to make the team. It wouldn't surprise me. I don't know if he would survive in the practice squad. I think somebody would snatch him up. But um, man, I mean, just really interesting guy. Has some really good tape. I mean, I didn't do. I went back and watched a little bit more of him after we picked him up. But again, the biggest thing I see is a lot of special team
Hey,
stuff, and if he's
yep,
willing to play that role in special teams,
you better.
Dave Taub's the special teams coordinator, and he has a lot of pull on who makes the roster.
And that's where he's going to have to
So
make his hay early on if he's going to make the team. There ain't no question about that. What about the two offensive linemen, Darrell Williams and Yasir Durant? A couple of SEC linemen with
yeah,
draftable grades.
yeah. Again, I was really Darrell Williams was one of those guys that went, how did he not get drafted? I thought, man, I really thought he was gonna get picked up and do pretty well. But so I'm excited about that. I think that the Chiefs have they've got some competition to kind of look at. On the inside, their center Austin Ryder did well, but again, he's about at the. I would say it would be nice to have a better somebody to have an upgrade. But Williams will probably compete for a backup center spot. They drafted Nick Allegretti out of Illinois last year, so there's going to be competition there. It wouldn't surprise me if Williams won that backup spot. It wouldn't surprise me to see him
Okay.
starting in a couple years. I mean, I liked his tape. Maybe he's got some things to work on in terms of um, I think he needs to be a little bit stronger, off the ball. And I'm not sure how well he'll move, but again, give him a couple years in an NFL weight room and develop him. Um, Yasir Durant, I was excited about. Again, a guy I was like, man, how did he not? How did he end up not being drafted? Um, again, and also local kid, but man, he's a big dude. Um, I think the biggest thing with Durant that impresses me is just watching him get out in space, and at 6'6", 330, and he's got long arms, but he can move. I kind of wonder if they'll put him in at guard and give him again kind of that similar path to what they're doing with Lucas Niang, where they'll say, hey, let's start you at guard, move you out and about. The Chiefs did move on from Cam
Mm-hmm.
Irving this year, which he was their swing tackle and he played guard at times, and he was kind of their five tool offensive lineman. And I think Durant, maybe that's what they're looking at with him, is this guy they can put him inside, put him outside. He's got the athletic ability to move around. Doesn't have to be an all pro, but if he can be a backup and provide some depth, I think that's a pretty good thing to get out of an
Yep. And
undrafted free
then,
agent.
besides Rodney Clemens, the safety from SMU, who is also a draftable player, Tommy Townsend, the punter from
Mm-hmm.
Florida, who had a nice career there at Florida, one of the top punters in the country the last few years. I talked about the Chiefs needing to think about moving on from Colquitt, who had been around, very serviceable for many years in the draft profile. And that could be exactly what they're going to do with Tommy Townsend.
Yeah, I mean that's it's a big shoe to fill. That's Dustin Colquitt was not just a great punter for Kansas City, but he was loved by the community. He did so much work, and um, just helping kids out and helping families out, and um,
Oh yeah,
it's tough to move on from him.
they
But
all
again,
move on.
contract and age, and But it also sounds like they really wanted Townsend.
He could
and
have
so
been
I
drafted.
think he's
Townsend.
Yeah, I think he's going to make the roster and do pretty well. They're not going to. Good thing is, they don't have to. He doesn't have to punt
That's
a whole
true.
lot. So
good point.
as long as he can, he'll have to learn to hold the extra points but he'll have
practice doing that.
They'll keep his legs fresh and yeah. So I think he'll make the roster as their punter. I'd be surprised if it didn't work out that way.
Well, look, that's a lot of draftable players that they signed. So it'll be interesting to find out how many stick to the practice squad, because a lot of those guys could stick on the practice squad that we talked about, because that's the talent there. So we'll see how it all unfolds. When we talk again, it'll be just before training camp. So we'll get an opportunity to preview training camp whenever that is, and hopefully they'll make some sort of announcement as soon as possible so we know football will get underway. We'll take a look at how the roster will shape up during training camp. And then it's off to the regular season, and the Chiefs defending their Super Bowl title. So I'm a national fan, so yeah. I know how it is to be a champion under these conditions, because the way I think, baseball is different because they're going to miss half the season, but I'm like, hey, take your time. The longer you take your time, we're still champs, man. So, skip the year. Yeah. Let's go to 2021. We're still champs. So I know how it is to be in that position as a Chief fan. Even if they have to wait a few extra weeks or a month, that's okay, man. You're defending champs.
Yeah, I mean, all we need is one game so we can raise the banner, and then we can just jump in the playoffs and do it all over again.
All right, thanks a lot. Appreciate it, Tom. We'll talk to you again before training camp. Take care.
All right, sounds good.
You too.